In the annals of audacious acts, few resonate with such quiet significance. It was the night of March 8, 1971. America, and indeed much of the world, was captivated. The fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier held millions spellbound. Televisions glowed in living rooms across the nation, radios crackled with blow-by-blow commentary. Amidst this colossal distraction, a different kind of drama unfolded. It happened in Media, Pennsylvania, a small, unassuming suburban town, the kind of place where little of national import ever seemed to occur. Yet this night would etch Media into history. This was no ordinary robbery. The target was not a bank stuffed with cash. It was not a jewelry store glittering with gems. Instead, the objective was far more abstract, yet infinitely more potent. A small, almost anonymous FBI field office. The perpetrators sought not personal enrichment, they were on a mission to find something else entirely. They aimed to steal files, documents, secrets. They believed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agency sworn to protect the people, was instead turning its power against them. This belief spurred them to an act of incredible daring, an act that would ripple outwards with unforeseen consequences. The audacity of the plan was matched only by its meticulous, almost invisible execution. While the nation focused on punches thrown in a distant ring, a different kind of battle was joined. One fought with crowbars, lockpicks, and an unshakable resolve. The intruders moved with a ghostly quietness. They were not seasoned criminals, hardened by a life outside the law. Their identities at the time were a complete mystery. They slipped into the FBI office, their purpose clear, their nerves presumably stretched taut. What they sought was evidence, the kind that could expose wrongdoing at the highest levels. The events of that March night initially passed largely unnoticed by the wider public. The news, when it eventually broke, might have seemed like a minor local crime. A small federal office burglarized, perhaps some equipment stolen, some papers disturbed. But this was far from a simple break-in. It was a deliberate, targeted intrusion, an act of civil disobedience on an unprecedented scale. The files they sought were not mundane administrative records. They were believed to contain the hidden truths of a government agency operating in the shadows beyond the scrutiny of the American people. The heist was a gamble, a dangerous, desperate throw of the dice. Who were these shadowy figures? Who dared to challenge the might of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI? They were not spies nor master thieves in the conventional sense. They were a collective of ordinary citizens, teachers, academics, parents, individuals deeply embedded in their communities, people who had watched the escalating social and political turmoil of the era. They had witnessed the government's response to dissent. They had grown increasingly concerned about the erosion of civil liberties. This concern transformed into a profound sense of duty, compelling them to act where others might only whisper their fears. These individuals gave themselves a name that spoke directly to their intent. They called themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. Their mission was not born of malice nor a desire for anarchy. It stemmed from a deep-seated belief in the core principles of American democracy, principles they felt were being systematically undermined. They suspected that the FBI, under its powerful and long-serving director, was engaged in activities that far exceeded its mandate. They believed the Bureau was unlawfully spying on American citizens, targeting those who dared to question the status quo. Their objective was singular and incredibly ambitious: to find irrefutable proof of these illicit operations, to gather the evidence that would lay bare the FBI's secret war against dissent. They understood the immense risks involved. They knew the power of the institution they were confronting. Failure could mean long prison sentences, ruined lives, and the silencing of their concerns. Yet the imperative to uncover the truth outweighed their personal fears. They were motivated by a conviction that the American public deserved to know what was being done in its name, with its tax money. The group was a microcosm of the peace and civil rights movements of the time. People who believed in active, nonviolent resistance. They felt that traditional avenues of protest and political pressure had proven insufficient. The system, they believed, was not self-correcting. It required a catalyst, a shock. The files they hoped to liberate were seen as that catalyst, the tangible proof that could force a reckoning. Their actions, therefore, were not merely about exposing wrongdoing, they were about reclaiming a degree of citizen oversight over the powerful machinery of the state. The target of the media break-in was deliberately chosen. It was not the FBI's heavily fortified headquarters in Washington, D.C. Instead, it was a small, seemingly insignificant resident agency. This choice was tactical. It offered a higher chance of success for a group of amateurs. But the value they sought was not contained in a steel vault filled with currency. The true treasure lay within filing cabinets, locked away in manila folders. The currency they pursued was truth. The assets they aimed to seize were the secrets the FBI held so tightly. This quest for truth unfolded against a backdrop of profound national unease. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a period of intense social upheaval in the United States. The Vietnam War raged, dividing the nation. The civil rights movement continued its struggle for equality, facing brutal resistance. Student protests, anti-war demonstrations, and calls for radical social change were met with an increasingly forceful response from government authorities. There was a growing sentiment, a gnawing suspicion, that government agencies were overstepping their bounds, suppressing legitimate dissent under the guise of national security. Challenging the FBI in 1971 was an act of extraordinary bravery, bordering on audacity. J. Edgar Hoover had helmed the Bureau for nearly 5 decades. He had cultivated an image of an incorruptible institution, the nation's primary defense against crime and subversion. He was a feared and powerful figure, known for his ruthlessness in dealing with perceived enemies. To take on Hoover's FBI was to invite the full wrath of the American state. The Citizens Commission knew this. They understood the potential repercussions. Yet their conviction in the necessity of their actions spurred them onward. The break-in, therefore, represented more than just a daring heist. It was a direct confrontation, a symbolic act of defiance against unchecked power. It was a statement that citizens would not stand idly by while their rights were infringed upon. The files they sought were not merely pieces of paper. They were potential keys to unlocking a hidden reality of government surveillance and manipulation. The Commission gambled that the contents of these files would be so damning that they would force a public conversation, and ultimately, reform. Their actions set the stage for a dramatic clash between secrecy and transparency. The meticulous planning for the media operation spanned many months. The members of the Citizens Commission were not professional burglars. They were learning on the job, driven by their singular purpose. They painstakingly cased the FBI office. They observed routines, noted security measures, or the apparent lack thereof. They rehearsed their entry and exit. Every detail was scrutinized. On the chosen night, armed with crowbars, lockpicks, and a collective resolve that belied their amateur status, they put their plan into motion. Their success in breaching the office was the first crucial step. Once inside, their focus was relentless. They knew they had limited time. They systematically searched for documents, ignoring office equipment or petty cash. Their haul was substantial, over 1,000 classified documents. These were not random papers. They were the internal workings of the FBI, records of its investigations, its informants, its methods. The group transported these sensitive files to a secluded farmhouse. There, hidden from prying eyes, they began the arduous task of sifting through the mountain of information they had liberated. What they were about to uncover would exceed even their most troubling suspicions. Amongst the stacks of paper, a term began to emerge repeatedly, an acronym that would soon become infamous, COINTELPRO. This was the code name for a series of covert and often illegal counterintelligence programs conducted by the FBI. These programs were not aimed at foreign spies. They were directed squarely at American citizens, civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, student groups, black empowerment organizations, and others deemed subversive by the Bureau. The documents laid bare a systematic campaign of surveillance, infiltration, and disruption. The initial discovery of COINTELPRO was a moment of profound shock and vindication for the burglars. Here was the proof they had sought, the concrete evidence of the FBI's secret war against its own people. The files detailed tactics designed to discredit individuals and groups. They spoke of creating paranoia, of using informants to sow discord, and of employing psychological warfare. Even revered figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were revealed to have been relentlessly targeted. The Citizens Commission now held in their hands the dynamite that could expose the FBI's darkest secrets to the entire nation. The question was, what would they do with it? Media, Pennsylvania. The name itself seemed to promise nothing more than comfortable obscurity. It was, in many ways, the quintessential American suburb. Tree-lined streets branched out, adorned with well-kept houses. Local businesses thrived on a familiar rhythm of daily life. A strong sense of community pervaded the air, comforting and predictable. This was not a place one associated with radical acts or secrets of national consequence. It presented a facade of serene, almost determined ordinariness. A haven, it appeared, from the turbulent currents shaking the wider world. Few would have picked media as the crucible for a rebellion. The town's anonymity on the grand stage of American events was, perhaps, its most defining characteristic. Places like media formed the quiet backdrop to the nation's drama, rarely thrust into the spotlight themselves. This very obscurity, however, would prove to be a crucial element in the unfolding plot. The local FBI office, a small resident agency, reflected this low profile. It was not a fortress, but a modest presence. No one would expect such an unassuming outpost to become the source of a scandal that would challenge the foundations of federal power. The subsequent shock was amplified by the sheer improbability of its origin. The early 1970s were a period of profound national division. The Vietnam War continued to rage, fueling widespread protest. The struggle for civil rights pressed on, often meeting fierce resistance. These were tremors felt across the country, yet in towns like Media, they often seemed like distant thunder, stories watched on the evening news rather than experienced directly. However, the undercurrents of dissent, the deep yearning for justice and accountability, flowed even here. They stirred beneath the calm suburban surface, taking root in the hearts of citizens who, to the outside world, appeared entirely conventional. It was within this tranquil setting that an extraordinary secret began to fester. Meticulous plans were being laid, clandestine meetings held. All this occurred unseen, unheard, beneath the placid veneer of media's daily existence. A dangerous, high-stakes conspiracy was taking shape, driven by individuals who blended seamlessly into the fabric of the town. This hidden enterprise was a ticking clock, counting down to a moment that would irrevocably shatter media's cherished peace. The town, in its quietude, was an unwitting stage for an act of profound defiance. The night of 8th March 1971 was dominated by a singular, colossal event. The fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. This was far more than a mere boxing contest. It was a cultural phenomenon, a flashpoint for the era's simmering tensions and societal divisions. Millions across America, and indeed the world, were utterly captivated. Their attention was riveted to radios and television screens. Such a profound level of collective focus on a single spectacle was a rare occurrence. It created a unique societal blind spot, a window of opportunity that the architects of the media burglary had astutely identified. This national preoccupation provided the perfect cloak for their audacious endeavor. With a significant portion of the populace distracted, fewer people would be out on the streets. Law enforcement resources, too, might be stretched thin or simply less alert. The roar of the crowd, the tension of the bout, effectively drowned out the quieter, more furtive activities taking place in a small Pennsylvania town. It was an inspired piece of timing. The burglars could move with greater freedom, their actions concealed by a nation looking the other way. The night itself seemed to offer a protective shroud. Within media itself, the scene mirrored that of the wider country. Living rooms glowed with the flickering images from Madison Square Garden. The excited commentary of the fight would have drifted through the quiet suburban streets, a collective murmur of anticipation and reaction. Families gathered, neighbors perhaps sharing a drink and a view of the contest. This shared communal experience served to heighten the isolation of the burglars and the clandestine nature of their mission. They were moving against the tide of the town's and the nation's attention, operating within a bubble of secrecy. The psychological impact of this immense distraction cannot be understated. It likely emboldened the members of the Citizens Commission, knowing that the vast machinery of societal observation was temporarily pointed elsewhere, could have subtly lessened the perceived immediacy of the risks they faced. Media Pennsylvania was, for those few hours, largely oblivious to its impending date with history. Its secret was safe, cocooned by the drama of the fight, but it was a secret on the verge of a dramatic public birth once the final bell rang. The individuals who conceived and executed the media FBI office burglary were not figures from the criminal underworld. They were, in many respects, the very pillars of their communities. Professors, respected academics, dedicated teachers, caring parents, and committed peace activists. Their ordinariness was perhaps their most effective disguise. These were not people one would readily associate with daring late-night raids on federal property. Their motivation stemmed not from a desire for personal gain, but from a deeply troubled conscience, a profound sense of moral obligation to act against perceived injustices. Leading such double lives presented an immense and constant challenge. In the close-knit environments of suburbia, where anonymity is scarce, maintaining absolute secrecy was paramount. Every casual conversation, every chance encounter, carried the potential for an inadvertent slip, arousing suspicion. They had to meticulously compartmentalize their existence. By day they were engaged in their conventional professions and family lives. By night, or in stolen moments, they were conspirators, plotting a direct challenge to one of the nation's most powerful institutions. The strain of this duality must have been considerable. Their clandestine preparations unfolded in the most mundane of settings, perhaps in the quiet of a suburban basement surrounded by household clutter, or during hushed, late-night conversations in parked cars on dimly lit residential streets. The tools of their impending trade crowbars, lockpicks, maps of the targeted building would have seemed starkly out of place in these domestic environments. This very contrast between the ordinary backdrop of media and the extraordinary illegal activities being planned highlights the audacity of their undertaking. The quiet streets unknowingly hid these furtive, determined efforts. What bound this disparate group of ordinary citizens together was an unwavering commitment to their cause and an unspoken pact of mutual trust. Shared risk forged a powerful bond. They operated as a self-contained unit, an island of intense, focused activity within a wider sea of suburban tranquility. Their belief in the necessity of exposing the FBI's overreach transcended personal fear. The secret they collectively carried was a heavy burden, a profound responsibility that they understood would soon ripple far beyond their small, dedicated circle and the quiet confines of media. Section 4. The Target in Plain Sight. A vulnerable outpost. The FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, was not an imposing bastion of federal authority. It was no J. Edgar Hoover building with stern guards and visible fortifications. Instead, it likely occupied a modest suite of rooms within an ordinary commercial building. Perhaps it was situated above a local shop, or nestled alongside a solicitor's office or a dental practice. Its very integration into the mundane streetscape made it an accessible, almost unremarkable feature of the town. This lack of overt security, this unassuming presence, was a key factor in its selection by the Citizens Commission. The decision to target this specific, smaller office was a masterstroke of strategic thinking. It represented a calculated gamble. A resident agency, as it was known, would undoubtedly hold significant and sensitive files, the very evidence the group sought. Yet, it would not possess the formidable defenses of a major metropolitan FBI headquarters. For a group of amateur burglars, driven by conviction rather than criminal expertise, success in media was plausible. They meticulously studied its layout, its routines, and its apparent vulnerabilities. The potential prize documentary proof of FBI misconduct justified the inherent risks. There was a profound irony in this particular outpost of federal power proving so susceptible. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, an institution meticulously built on an image of omniscience, efficiency, and invincibility, was shown to have its own points of weakness. In the quiet suburban setting of media, this vulnerability was laid bare. The Bureau's extensive reach extended into the heart of small-town America, but so too did its exposure to unforeseen challenges. The very peacefulness of the environment may have bred a degree of complacency, a chink in the armor. This unassuming FBI office, tucked away on a quiet street in media, was destined to become the epicenter of a national controversy. The physical building was merely brick and mortar. Its true significance lay in the secrets contained within its filing cabinets. Those documents held the explosive potential to fundamentally alter the public's perception of a powerful government agency. The street it occupied, hitherto anonymous, was on the verge of becoming a dateline known across the country. The office was a symbol, and its violation would resonate far beyond the town's borders. Section 5. The Eve of Revelation, Media's Unknowing Vigil. In the final tense hours leading up to the night of 8 March 1971, an electric current of nervous energy and quiet resolve undoubtedly pulsed through the Citizens Commission. Final preparations would have been made with meticulous care. Each member, acutely aware of the profound implications of their impending actions, likely grappled with a mixture of fear and determination. The point of no return was rapidly approaching. Years of growing concern, months of painstaking planning, were all converging on this single decisive night. The air itself must have seemed thick with unspoken anxieties and fervent hopes. As darkness descended upon media, the town settled into its familiar nightly rhythm. Lights in homes began to extinguish one by one. The streets grew quieter, wrapped in the customary peace of a weekday evening. The only widespread deviation from the norm was the collective attention focused on the Ali Frazier fight, its drama playing out on television screens across the town. This picture of domestic tranquility, of suburban life proceeding undisturbed, stood in stark contrast to the covert, high-stakes operation about to unfold in its very midst. The prevailing peace was a fragile veneer. The boxing match served as the final curtain, the ultimate distraction before the main event commenced for the burglars. They waited for their cue, the moment when national attention would be at its peak, focused elsewhere. Residents of media, cheering for their chosen fighter, were unknowingly providing the perfect conditions, the ideal soundscape and cover, for the daring heist. The destiny of J. Edgar Hoover's most sensitive secrets, hidden away in their town's FBI office, was inextricably linked to the punches being thrown hundreds of miles distant in New York City. The illusion of media's quiet, undisturbed existence was on the brink of being shattered. The potent secret it had unknowingly harbored was about to erupt, not just into local awareness, but onto the national stage. This unassuming Pennsylvania town was the crucible for an act of extraordinary civil disobedience. From its quiet streets and ordinary homes, a story of immense courage, profound defiance, and damning exposure was poised to emerge. Media, Pennsylvania, was about to cease being just another suburban town and become a significant dateline in the annals of American history. The quiet was about to end, definitively. Section 1. The Edge of Action, Final Checks and Furtive Movements. The plan, months in the making, now hung heavy in the March air. Each member of the Citizens Commission felt its crushing weight. They had rehearsed every step, every contingency, countless times in their minds. Yet, no rehearsal could truly prepare them for the reality of this night. Final checks were made, tools confirmed, alibis for worried families meticulously established. The city of Philadelphia, and its quieter suburb media, remained largely oblivious. Most eyes were fixed on the flickering images of Alley and Frazier, their epic battle providing an unintended but perfect smokescreen for the Commission's own momentous fight against a different kind of power. This distraction was a critical element, a calculated gamble. As the appointed hour drew near, the small team moved with a mixture of trepidation and grim resolve. They were ordinary people, academics, parents, idealists, not seasoned criminals. The tools they carried, a crowbar, lockpicks, torches, felt alien in their hands. Their hearts pounded a rhythm against their ribs, a counterpoint to the distant cheers from homes tuned into the boxing match. They approached the nondescript building housing the FBI's resident agency. It looked just like any other office block, slumbering in the suburban night. This very ordinariness was part of its vulnerability, a weakness they intended to exploit fully, for a purpose far greater than themselves. The leader of the entry team, a physics professor, had spent weeks painstakingly teaching himself the rudiments of lock-picking. He had practiced on an array of locks, his fingers growing more adept with each passing day. Another member had cased the building relentlessly, observing patterns, noting the absence of alarms, the infrequency of patrols. They understood the layout, the likely location of the filing cabinets. Their intelligence was gathered not through sophisticated espionage, but through patient, citizen-led observation. They were driven by a profound conviction that the government was betraying its own people. This belief fueled their courage, steeling their nerves against the considerable risks. The darkness offered a thin veil of protection, but the silence of the suburban street was a double-edged sword. Every scraped footstep, every whispered word seemed to echo unnaturally loud. They moved like shadows, acutely aware that any unexpected encounter, a late-night dog walker or a passing police car, could unravel their entire enterprise. The fate of their mission and their own futures rested on their ability to remain unseen, unheard. The seconds stretched into an eternity as they positioned themselves, ready to make the irreversible move from planning to action, from concerned citizens to burglars for a cause. Section 2. The breached steel doors and silent prayers. The primary obstacle was the main door to the FBI office suite. It was a sturdy, locked barrier, the first true test of their preparation and nerve. The designated lockpicker stepped forward, his tools glinting faintly in the dim light from the street. He worked with intense concentration, the delicate clicks of the tumblers sounding like gunshots in the profound quiet. Time seemed to warp, each minute an agony of suspense. The other members kept watch, their senses heightened, scanning the quiet street for any sign of danger. The pressure was immense. Failure at this first hurdle meant the entire operation was compromised before it truly began. Despite his diligent practice, the sophisticated lock on the FBI office door proved unexpectedly resistant. Precious minutes ticked by, frustration mounting. The lock held firm, a silent guardian of the secrets within. The initial plan for a subtle, almost invisible entry began to falter. A new, more forceful approach was needed, a decision fraught with increased risk. The crowbar, initially a tool of last resort, now became their primary instrument. This shift in tactics amplified the potential for noise, for discovery. It was a moment of critical decision, made under duress, the kind that could define success or catastrophic failure. With hushed urgency, the crowbar was applied to the door jamb. The sound of straining wood and metal, though carefully muffled, seemed deafening to the anxious burglars. Each creak, each groan of the resisting door sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through their systems. They worked with a desperate strength, their earlier stealth abandoned for brute force. It was a raw, nerve-shredding effort. The possibility of attracting attention grew with every passing second. They could only hope that the nation's focus on the distant boxing match and a healthy dose of luck would keep their forced entry from being noticed by anyone. Finally, with a sickening crack, the lock splintered. The door yielded. A wave of relief, quickly followed by a fresh surge of anxiety, washed over the group. They had crossed a significant threshold, both literally and metaphorically. They were inside. The air within the office felt stale, heavy with the scent of paper and bureaucracy. There was no turning back now. The path ahead led directly into the heart of J. Edgar Hoover's domain, into the very files they believed held damning proof of an agency out of control. Their silent prayers had been answered, but the most dangerous part of their mission had only just begun. Section 3. Inside the Sanctum. A frantic search for truth. Once inside, the team moved with swift, practiced urgency. Torches cut sharp beams through the darkness, dancing across rows of gray filing cabinets. This was the treasure they sought, not gold or currency, but paper. Documents that could expose the hidden underbelly of federal power. They knew they had limited time. The longer they remained, the greater the risk of discovery. Their primary task was to locate the most incriminating files, the records that would prove the FBI was systematically violating the rights of American citizens. This was not a random grab. It was a targeted extraction of evidence. The sheer volume of files was daunting. Cabinet after cabinet lined the walls, each drawer packed tight with manila folders. They had no prior knowledge of the FBI's filing system, no insider map to guide their search. They worked methodically, yet with a desperate haste, pulling open drawers, their gloved hands rifling through the contents. They looked for keywords, for project names, for anything that hinted at surveillance of political groups, peace activists, or civil rights organizations. Every rustle of paper, every metallic clang of a closing drawer, echoed ominously in the otherwise silent office space. The burglars had brought suitcases and bags to carry their anticipated haul. As they identified potentially significant documents, they began to fill them. The selection process was rapid, almost instinctive. There was no time for meticulous reading, only for quick judgment calls based on folder labels and document headings. They were searching for evidence of COINTELPRO, though they might not have known its precise name at that moment. They were looking for the proof of what they had long suspected, that the FBI was engaged in a covert war against dissent, far exceeding its legal mandate. Tension mounted as the search continued. One member of the team found a document conspicuously labeled COINTELPRO. It was a pivotal moment, a clear indication they were on the right track. Other files hinted at surveillance of student groups, of black activist organizations, and of individuals known for their anti-war stance. The sheer scope of the domestic spying began to dawn on them, even in these frantic initial moments. They were unearthing something far bigger, far more disturbing than they might have initially comprehended. The office was yielding its secrets, one folder at a time. Section 4. The weight of secrets, securing the stolen files. The quantity of relevant material was overwhelming. Suitcase after suitcase began to fill with documents. The burglars realized they had stumbled upon a veritable goldmine of information. Every folder seemed vital. Every page a potential piece of the puzzle they were trying to assemble for the American public. They worked against the clock, driven by the imperative to get as much as possible out of the office before their luck ran out. Leaving the office was as critical and as dangerous as entering it. They had to ensure no obvious traces of their presence were left behind. The weight of the suitcases was immense, not just in physical terms, but in the gravity of the secrets they contained. These were not mere papers. They were the documented actions of a powerful government agency. The escape from the building was tense. They moved with a quiet urgency, burdened by their precious cargo. The first part of their audacious plan was complete. They had breached the sanctum, taken the files, and, for now, evaded detection. The secluded farmhouse offered a sanctuary, a place where the Citizens Commission could finally begin to examine their haul without the immediate fear of discovery. The journey there had been fraught with anxiety. Once inside, with the doors secured and curtains drawn, a different kind of tension filled the air, the anticipation of what the stolen files would truly reveal. They spread the documents out on a large table, a chaotic landscape of official letterheads, typed reports, and handwritten annotations. The sheer volume was staggering. As they began to read, the true nature of the FBI's activities started to emerge with chilling clarity. Vague suspicions hardened into undeniable facts. The term COINTELPRO, an acronym for Counterintelligence Program, appeared with alarming frequency. It was the official designation for a series of covert and often illegal projects aimed at surveilling, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. The initial discoveries sent waves of shock and anger through the group. They found proof that the FBI was not merely observing, but actively seeking to sabotage civil rights groups. The breadth of the surveillance was astonishing, reaching into seemingly every corner of American activism. The burglars understood then with absolute certainty that they held evidence of profound wrongdoing. The morning of 9th March 1971 dawned like any other in Media, Pennsylvania. Yet, within the unassuming walls of the local FBI resident agency, a scene of unprecedented disarray was about to be uncovered. The first bureau employee to arrive likely anticipated a routine day of paperwork and procedure. Instead, they were met with the undeniable evidence of a profound violation. A forced door, splintered wood, and an unnerving silence where orderly files should have been. The initial moments must have been ones of sheer disbelief, quickly morphing into a sickening realization that the unthinkable had occurred. This was not petty vandalism. This was a targeted intrusion. Word of the breach spread through the small office with the speed of a wildfire. Panic began to supplant the initial shock. Filing cabinets, once meticulously organized repositories of sensitive information, stood agape, their contents plundered. It became terrifyingly clear that this was not merely a break-in, but a theft of secrets. The local agents, trained for order and control, found themselves engulfed in a sudden, bewildering chaos. The immediate, frantic calls to the Philadelphia field office, and then to the labyrinthine corridors of FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., carried a tone of barely suppressed hysteria. News of the media burglary reached J. Edgar Hoover with astonishing speed. In the wake of the humiliating breach, J. Edgar Hoover ordered one of the most intensive manhunts in the FBI's history. The directive was unequivocal: find the perpetrators, and find them now. Hundreds of agents were assigned to the case, a vast investigative machine roaring to life. Resources were poured into the investigation without reservation. Every available lead, no matter how tenuous, was to be pursued with relentless vigor. The reputation of the FBI was at stake. The investigation, codenamed Medberg for media burglary, began with a frustrating lack of tangible evidence. The burglars had been ghosts. They left behind no fingerprints, no witnesses, no obvious clues to their identities. They had vanished as silently as they had arrived. Agents interviewed anyone and everyone who might have seen something, anything, out of the ordinary. They canvassed the neighborhood, questioned local informants, and pored over the meager physical evidence from the scene. Yet the trail was cold, the culprits maddeningly elusive, adding to the mounting frustration within the Bureau. The pressure on the investigating agents was immense. Section 3. The leaks ignite. Secrets spilled into the public domain. While the FBI thrashed in the darkness, the Citizens Commission was carefully executing the next phase of their audacious plan. They had not stolen the files for personal enrichment or to hold them ransom. Their singular goal was exposure. Meticulously, they collated and copied selections of the most damning documents. These packets of information, each a potential bombshell, were then anonymously mailed to a carefully selected list of journalists and politicians. They targeted individuals and publications known for their willingness to challenge government narratives and speak truth to power. The arrival of these plain brown envelopes in newsrooms across the country must have caused considerable intrigue. Inside, recipients found official FBI documents clearly marked, detailing surveillance activities that seemed to stretch the bounds of legality and propriety. For journalists, this was an unprecedented leak, a direct window into the clandestine world of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. The implications were enormous. Authenticating the documents was the first crucial step, followed by the even more daunting decision of whether to publish information that the government would undoubtedly want suppressed. Among the recipients was the Washington Post. The editors there faced a profound ethical and legal dilemma. Section 4. A Nation Awakens, the Shockwaves of Truth. The reaction to the COINTELPRO revelations was one of widespread shock and profound disbelief. For many Americans, the FBI, under the long and seemingly unshakable leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, had been an institution beyond reproach. It was seen as the nation's primary defender against crime, espionage, and subversion. The idea that this same agency was systematically targeting its own citizens, engaging in dirty tricks and attempting to suppress legitimate dissent, was deeply unsettling. It challenged fundamental beliefs about the nature of American democracy and the role of its government. As more details emerged from the leaked documents, disbelief began to transform into a potent mixture of anger and betrayal. Citizens who had placed their trust in the FBI felt deceived. The stories were not abstract allegations. They were supported by the cold, hard evidence of the Bureau's own paperwork. The campaigns to discredit figures like Martin Luther King Jr., the infiltration of peaceful protest groups, the deliberate creation of paranoia. These tactics seemed more fitting for a totalitarian state than a democratic republic. The public, which had been largely unaware of such covert operations, was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about its watchmen. The narrative surrounding the FBI began to shift dramatically. The image of heroic G-men fighting gangsters and communists was now being overlaid with a more sinister picture. This erosion of public trust was a significant blow to the Bureau's prestige and authority. Section 5. The Bureau under siege. Cracks in the fortress. The Washington Post was not the only recipient of the Citizens Commission's carefully curated document packages. As other newspapers and journalists began to verify their own sets of files, a steady stream of further revelations followed. Each new article added another layer to the emerging picture of FBI misconduct. The relentless drip feed of damaging information kept the story alive, preventing the Bureau from easily dismissing the initial reports or containing the scandal. It became clear that the media break-in had yielded a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, far more extensive than perhaps even the burglars had initially realized. The FBI, under the furious gaze of J. Edgar Hoover, scrambled to engage in damage control. Public statements were issued, attempting to downplay the significance of the documents or to frame the activities as necessary for national security. Covert efforts were made to pressure news organizations into ceasing publication, citing concerns about compromised investigations or endangered informants. However, the sheer weight of the evidence, coupled with the courage of the press, rendered these efforts largely ineffective. The truth, once unleashed, proved difficult to recapture. The Bureau, accustomed to controlling information, found itself on the defensive, its credibility eroding with each new disclosure. Internally, the FBI was in turmoil. The ongoing and still unsuccessful Medberg investigation created an atmosphere of intense pressure and suspicion. Paranoia began to set in. Who were these burglars? Could there be insiders assisting them? The inability to identify and apprehend the culprits was a source of profound institutional embarrassment. The constant public exposure of its most sensitive operations created a sense of being under siege. Agents who had dedicated their lives to the Bureau now saw its reputation being systematically dismantled in the public square, based on its own documented actions. Morale in some quarters undoubtedly suffered. The fortress that J. Edgar Hoover had so meticulously constructed over decades was showing undeniable cracks. The media burglars, through their single audacious act, had triggered a crisis of confidence from which the FBI would struggle to recover for years. The chaos was not just in the initial scramble to deal with the break-in, it was in the sustained assault on the Bureau's image, its methods, and its very legitimacy. The stolen files were proving to be far more potent than any conventional weapon. The FBI was exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly isolated as the nation grappled with the uncomfortable truths it had tried so hard to conceal. The documents stolen from the media FBI office revealed a truth more disturbing than many could have imagined. They laid bare the existence of a highly secret, far-reaching program of domestic surveillance and sabotage. Its official designation was COINTELPRO, an acronym for Counterintelligence Program. This innocuous-sounding title was, in itself, a calculated deception. It suggested operations against foreign spies and hostile powers. Yet the true targets of COINTELPRO were not shadowy agents from abroad. They were American citizens, exercising their rights on American soil. The program was a hidden war waged by the nation's premier law enforcement agency against its own people. COINTELPRO was J. Edgar Hoover's clandestine weapon, designed to neutralize individuals and groups he deemed subversive. The files proved that the FBI was not merely observing, it was actively intervening. The program's objectives were stark: to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of these targeted groups and their leaders. This was not about preventing crime in the conventional sense. It was about suppressing political dissent. It was about maintaining a particular vision of American society, even if it meant trampling on the very freedoms the FBI was sworn to protect. The program operated with a chilling efficiency, its tendrils reaching into numerous aspects of American life. The methods employed under COINTELPRO were manifold and insidious. They ranged from forging correspondence to create internal divisions within organizations, to spreading false rumors to the media. Agents provocateurs were used to incite illegal activities, thereby justifying arrests and discrediting movements. Anonymous letters containing derogatory information, sometimes completely fabricated, were sent to family members, employers, and associates of activists. The psychological toll on those targeted was immense, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and fear. This systematic campaign was meticulously documented, filed away in the very cabinets the media burglars had prized open. Before the media heist, COINTELPRO was a ghost, a rumor whispered in activist circles but never substantiated with hard proof. The stolen files transformed these whispers into undeniable fact. They provided the concrete evidence, the official memoranda, the internal reports that detailed the program's existence and its nefarious aims. The Citizens Commission had not just stumbled upon isolated incidents of misconduct. They had uncovered a deliberate, institutionalized strategy of repression. The program that shouldn't exist was suddenly exposed, its dark operations dragged into the harsh glare of public scrutiny, shocking a nation that had largely trusted its guardians. The range of COINTELPRO's targets was breathtakingly broad, encompassing a vast spectrum of American dissent. The files proved that the FBI was systematically spying on and attempting to sabotage civil rights groups. Organizations striving for racial equality found themselves infiltrated, their leaders subjected to intense surveillance and campaigns of character assassination. The very movement that sought to uphold the nation's promise of liberty and justice for all was treated as an enemy of the state. This revelation struck at the heart of America's professed ideals, exposing a deep hypocrisy within its institutions. Anti-war protesters, vocal in their opposition to the conflict in Vietnam, were another primary focus. The FBI worked diligently to discredit the peace movement, portraying it as unpatriotic and influenced by foreign powers. Student activists, challenging societal norms and demanding change, found themselves under the Bureau's watchful eye. Black Panther leaders advocating for black empowerment and self-defense were subjected to particularly aggressive tactics, leading to violent confrontations and the decimation of their leadership. The FBI's actions sought to fracture these movements, to prevent them from building broader coalitions that could effectively challenge government policy. Indigenous organizers, fighting for treaty rights and self-determination, also fell under the COINTELPRO umbrella. Their efforts to reclaim their heritage and assert their sovereignty were viewed with suspicion and met with covert disruption. Essentially, any group or individual perceived by J. Edgar Hoover as a threat to the existing social and political order could become a target. The criteria were dangerously vague, allowing for the widespread application of these repressive measures. The program fostered an environment where the exercise of fundamental rights, such as freedom of speech and assembly, could invite severe government reprisal. The stolen documents detailed these operations with chilling bureaucratic detachment. Memos outlined strategies for neutralizing specific individuals, for creating internal dissension, or for exposing activists to public ridicule. This was not the work of a rogue agent. It was a coordinated effort, approved at high levels within the Bureau. The files revealed a government agency actively working to undermine the very fabric of democratic discourse. The truth was stark. The FBI had declared a secret war on a significant portion of its own citizenry, a war fought with lies, manipulation, and fear. Amongst the thousands of documents spirited away from the media office, the files concerning Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood out for their particularly venomous and personal nature. J. Edgar Hoover harbored a deep-seated, almost pathological animosity towards the civil rights leader. The stolen papers provided irrefutable proof of the FBI's relentless campaign to destroy King's reputation, discredit his leadership, and ultimately, to remove him as a significant force in American life. This was not mere surveillance, it was a vendetta, pursued with the full resources of a powerful government agency. The FBI employed a vast array of intrusive techniques against Dr. King. His phones were tapped, his hotel rooms bugged, his conversations meticulously recorded. Informants were deployed to gather information on his activities, his associates, and his private life. The Bureau amassed a huge volume of material, much of it intensely personal and selectively interpreted to cast King in the worst possible light. This information was then weaponized, leaked to friendly journalists or used in attempts to blackmail him. The goal was to undermine his moral authority and cripple the civil rights movement he so powerfully embodied. Perhaps the most infamous and chilling aspect of the campaign against Dr. King was the anonymous letter sent to him by the FBI in late 1964. This letter, accompanied by a tape recording purportedly detailing his extramarital affairs, accused him of being a colossal fraud and an evil, abnormal beast. It ended with a thinly veiled incitement to suicide, suggesting that there was only one way out for him. This was psychological warfare at its most brutal, a direct attempt by a government agency to push one of its most prominent citizens to self-destruction. The files from media helped to corroborate these shocking actions. The revelation of the FBI's sustained and malicious assault on Martin Luther King Jr. sent shockwaves across the nation and the world. King was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, a figure of immense moral stature. That he had been so viciously targeted by his own government was a profound betrayal of American values. The files proved this was not a conspiracy theory, it was a documented campaign of harassment and intimidation. It underscored the terrifying extent to which COINTELPRO had deviated from any legitimate law enforcement function, becoming instead a tool for personal vendettas and political repression. Section 4. Not fiction, but fact, the chilling authority of ink on paper. The power of the media documents lay in their undeniable authenticity. These were not wild accusations or speculative theories spun from the ether of paranoia. These were official government records typed on FBI letterhead, signed by bureau officials, marked with classification stamps. They were the cold, hard facts of a program that many found difficult to comprehend could even exist in a democracy. The meticulous record-keeping of the FBI, usually a tool of its investigative prowess, now became the very evidence that condemned its actions. The truth was there, in black and white, for anyone who dared to look. For the American public, grappling with these revelations was a profoundly unsettling experience. It was one thing to suspect government overreach, quite another to see it laid bare in such explicit detail. The files read like the plot of a dystopian novel, a chilling narrative of a state turning against its own citizens. Yet, this was not fiction. This was real. The attempt to drive Martin Luther King Jr. to suicide, the infiltration of peaceful protest groups, the deliberate fomenting of violence. These were not the imaginings of a novelist, but the documented strategies of a federal agency. The exposure of COINTELPRO forced a painful national reckoning. It shattered the carefully cultivated image of the FBI as an infallible guardian of justice. It revealed an institution capable of profound abuses of power, operating with minimal oversight, and a blatant disregard for fundamental civil liberties. The documents proved that the government itself had engaged in systematic efforts to spy on, sabotage, and blackmail American citizens whose only crime was to voice dissent or advocate for change. This truth was so disturbing, it read like a conspiracy, yet it was all demonstrably real. The impact of these government documents was seismic. They provided the irrefutable proof that catalyzed public outrage and, eventually, led to congressional investigations and significant reforms. The media burglars, by liberating these files, had armed the public with knowledge, the most potent weapon against unchecked power. They showed that even the most secretive programs could be brought into the light. The legacy of COINTELPRO, as revealed by those stolen papers, serves as a permanent, chilling reminder of what can happen when surveillance is untethered from accountability and the rule of law. Section 1. The unraveling Congress steps in, fury erupts. The steady torrent of revelations originating from the humble media FBI office could not be ignored indefinitely. Public discourse, once dominated by a mixture of shock and disbelief, began to coalesce into a powerful demand for accountability. The carefully constructed dam of FBI secrecy, breached by the Citizens Commission, was now crumbling under the relentless pressure of truth. Newspaper headlines screamed indignation. Editorials questioned the very foundations of federal law enforcement. The sheer scale of domestic spying and disruptive tactics detailed in the COINTELPRO files painted a picture of an agency dangerously adrift from its constitutional moorings, a rogue elephant trampling civil liberties with impunity. This growing public outrage eventually forced the hand of the United States Congress. For too long, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI had operated with minimal effective oversight, shielded by the director's immense political power and the carefully cultivated myth of its infallibility. But the media documents provided undeniable, tangible proof of systemic abuse. In 1975, spurred by these disclosures and subsequent leaks revealing similar overreach by other intelligence agencies, the Senate established a special committee. Chaired by Senator Frank Church, it became known simply as the Church Committee. Its mandate was broad to investigate the full extent of governmental operations that spied on American citizens. The Church Committee hearings were a landmark moment in American history. They brought the clandestine activities of the FBI, CIA, and NSA into the stark light of public scrutiny. High-ranking officials were called to testify, forced to answer for decades of covert actions. The COINTELPRO documents, meticulously gathered and disseminated by the media burglars, formed a crucial part of the evidence. The nation watched, transfixed, as the inner workings of its intelligence apparatus were laid bare. The committee's findings were damning, confirming the worst fears about illegal surveillance, harassment campaigns, and attempts to subvert domestic political movements. The impact was immediate and profound. The FBI, once an almost untouchable institution, found itself under an intense, uncomfortable spotlight. Its methods, its motivations, and its leadership were all subjected to rigorous public examination. The carefully constructed facade of an agency solely dedicated to fighting crime and foreign espionage shattered. The truth, unearthed by a small group of ordinary citizens, had triggered a constitutional crisis, forcing a national confrontation with the dark side of state power. The fallout from media was no longer a containable incident, it was a full-blown political firestorm, reshaping the landscape of American governance. Section 2. Ending the Reign. COINTELPRO's demise and bureaucratic tremors. The weight of public exposure and the damning findings of congressional investigations became unbearable for the FBI. The COINTELPRO operations, once hidden in the deepest recesses of the Bureau, were now synonymous with government abuse. Under immense pressure, the FBI was forced to officially acknowledge and terminate these controversial programs. In 1971, shortly after the initial leaks, J. Edgar Hoover had issued directives to cease all operations that could fall under the COINTELPRO umbrella, attempting some damage control. However, the full extent and formal dismantling were only truly confirmed through the subsequent investigations and reforms. The official end of COINTELPRO marked a significant turning point for the Bureau. It was an admission, however reluctant, that its actions had been improper and in many cases, illegal. This was a bitter pill for an organization that had prided itself on its adherence to the law, at least publicly. The dismantling meant more than just stopping specific operations, it signaled the beginning of a painful internal reckoning. Procedures had to be reviewed, guidelines rewritten, and a new understanding of permissible investigative techniques slowly, painstakingly, established. The era of unchecked domestic counterintelligence, as Hoover had practiced it, was over. Within the FBI, the tremors were significant. The revelations led to a period of uncertainty and introspection. Agents who had carried out COINTELPRO directives, believing they were acting in the nation's best interest, now saw their work condemned. The hierarchical, almost militaristic culture fostered by Hoover, where orders were rarely questioned, came under scrutiny. The exposure of these secret programs eroded the unquestioning obedience that had long characterized the Bureau. It forced a re-evaluation of the FBI's role in a democratic society, prompting difficult questions about the balance between national security and individual liberties. While COINTELPRO was officially shuttered, the bureaucratic machinery that had enabled it remained. The challenge was not merely to end a program but to change a deeply ingrained mindset. The legacy of Hoover's long reign, his emphasis on secrecy, and his broad interpretation of national security threats would cast a long shadow. The termination of COINTELPRO was a crucial first step, a direct consequence of the media burglars' audacious act. Yet, ensuring such abuses would never be repeated required more than just an internal directive. It demanded fundamental structural changes to how the FBI operated and how it was overseen. The shocking revelations stemming from the media burglary and the subsequent Church Committee investigation spurred Congress to take decisive legislative action. It became abundantly clear that internal FBI directives and assurances were insufficient to prevent future abuses of power. New laws were deemed essential to establish clear boundaries for intelligence gathering and to protect American citizens from illegal surveillance by their own government. The era of agencies operating with near total autonomy in the shadows was drawing to a close, at least in principle. The goal was to forge new legal chains on covert power. One of the most significant legislative outcomes was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978. While primarily aimed at regulating the collection of foreign intelligence, FISA also established procedures for the surveillance of agents of foreign powers within the United States, including American citizens under certain circumstances. It created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a secret court to review and authorize surveillance warrants for national security purposes. This was a direct response to the warrantless wiretapping and bugging that had been rampant under COINTELPRO, aiming to bring such activities under judicial oversight. Beyond FISA, new guidelines were issued by the Attorney General to govern FBI investigations, particularly those involving domestic political activity. These guidelines sought to impose stricter criteria for initiating investigations, limiting the use of intrusive techniques, and requiring greater accountability. The aim was to prevent the FBI from launching politically motivated investigations or using its powers to harass or discredit individuals and groups based solely on their beliefs or associations. The focus shifted, at least officially, towards investigating actual criminal activity, rather than monitoring and disrupting constitutionally protected dissent. These new laws and guidelines represented a fundamental shift in the legal framework governing intelligence activities in the United States. They were a direct consequence of the abuses exposed by the media burglars and others. For the first time, clear legal constraints were placed on the FBI's ability to spy on Americans. While the effectiveness and interpretation of these laws would be debated for decades to come, their passage marked a critical moment. It was an acknowledgement that unchecked power, even in the name of national security, posed a profound threat to democracy. The secrets stolen from media had catalyzed a movement towards greater legal restraint. The COINTELPRO revelations, ignited by the media break-in, delivered a devastating blow to the FBI's public image. For decades, J. Edgar Hoover had meticulously cultivated a heroic narrative for the Bureau. G-men were portrayed as incorruptible defenders of justice, symbols of American strength and integrity. This carefully constructed image was shattered, replaced by a far more troubling picture of an agency capable of deception, manipulation, and the systematic violation of citizens' rights. The trust that many Americans had placed in the FBI was profoundly shaken, and in many cases, irrevocably broken. The tarnishing of its reputation had significant consequences for the Bureau. Public cooperation, vital for effective law enforcement, became more difficult to secure in some communities. Skepticism and suspicion replaced the deference the FBI had once commanded. Recruiting new agents also faced challenges, as the allure of joining a once revered institution was diminished by the stain of scandal. The FBI found itself on the defensive, forced to confront a deeply skeptical public and a newly assertive Congress. The fortress of invincibility that Hoover had built around his agency had been breached, not by criminals, but by its own documented misdeeds. Rebuilding that fractured image and regaining public trust became a paramount long-term challenge for the FBI. It required more than just official apologies or promises of reform. It necessitated a demonstrable commitment to operating within the bounds of the law and with respect for constitutional rights. Successive FBI directors after Hoover grappled with this legacy, attempting to steer the Bureau towards greater transparency and accountability. This was a slow and arduous process, hampered by the deeply ingrained culture of secrecy and the sheer scale of the abuses that had been exposed. The road back was long, and some would argue it is a journey still underway. The scars left by COINTELPRO were deep, both on the public psyche and on the institution itself. The media burglary acted as a harsh mirror, forcing the FBI and the nation to confront an uncomfortable reflection. While the Bureau has undoubtedly evolved since the tumultuous days of the 1970s, the memory of COINTELPRO serves as a permanent reminder of its capacity for overreach. The quest for a balance between effective law enforcement and the protection of civil liberties remains a central, ongoing tension, a direct legacy of that fateful night in media. The media burglary and the subsequent unmasking of COINTELPRO did more than just force immediate reforms. They permanently altered the landscape of government secrecy and oversight in America. The audacious act of the Citizens Commission demonstrated that even the most powerful and secretive agencies were not invulnerable to exposure by determined individuals. It set a powerful precedent, inspiring future whistleblowers and investigative journalists. The idea that citizens could directly challenge and expose government misconduct gained a new, potent legitimacy. This shift fundamentally changed the dynamic between the state and its people. Before media, the inner workings of agencies like the FBI were largely opaque, shielded from public view by layers of classification and institutional power. The successful leak of thousands of documents prized open this world, revealing the dangers of unchecked secrecy. It underscored the vital role of a free press in holding power accountable. The journalists and newspapers that published the COINTELPRO files, often in the face of government pressure, played an indispensable part in informing the public and driving the demand for change. The relationship between intelligence agencies and the media became more adversarial, more skeptical. Furthermore, the scandal catalyzed a greater, albeit sometimes reluctant, acceptance within government of the need for more robust oversight mechanisms. Congressional committees like the Church Committee became more assertive in their scrutiny of intelligence activities. While the tension between national security claims and the public's right to know persists, the media exposed created a baseline expectation that such agencies would be subject to more rigorous external review. The days when a director like J. Edgar Hoover could operate with such sweeping autonomy, largely unchallenged, were effectively over. The system of checks and balances, however imperfect, was strengthened. The unseen scars of COINTELPRO, brought to light by the media heist, remain etched in the American political consciousness. They serve as a constant reminder of the fragility of civil liberties in the face of state power. The bravery of those 8 ordinary citizens who risked their freedom to expose the truth had a lasting impact, contributing to a more skeptical, more demanding citizenry. Democracy, they showed, indeed dies in darkness. Their actions ensured that a significant portion of that darkness was dispelled, forever changing the FBI and America's understanding of the price of vigilance. The Media, Pennsylvania, FBI office burglary of 1971 remains a stark, resonant chapter in the annals of American history. It was an act of profound audacity. A small cadre of ordinary citizens, armed not with weapons but with an unshakable conviction, dared to challenge the formidable might of the federal government. They did not seek riches or personal acclaim. Their quarry was truth. Their objective was to drag the clandestine operations of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI into the harsh, unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. What they achieved reverberated far beyond the quiet suburban streets of that small town, fundamentally altering the relationship between the American people and their intelligence agencies. For over 4 decades, the identities of these citizen burglars remained one of the FBI's most frustrating unsolved mysteries. They melted back into their everyday lives, carrying the immense burden of their secret. Teachers, academics, parents, they resumed their unassuming roles, their extraordinary act of defiance known only to a trusted few. The personal cost of this prolonged silence, the constant low hum of potential discovery, must have been immense. Yet their commitment to the cause and to protecting each other held firm. When some members finally chose to step forward in 2014, it was not for glory, but to ensure the full story was told. to cement its place in the narrative of civic resistance. This was whistleblowing, but of a radically different order. It was not an insider leaking documents from within the system. This was an external force, a group of concerned outsiders who took it upon themselves to physically acquire the evidence of wrongdoing. They pierced the veil of secrecy from the outside in. The risks they undertook were colossal. Long prison sentences, ruined careers, and the full, unmitigated wrath of a humiliated and powerful institution. Their actions pushed the boundaries of civil disobedience, forcing a national conversation about what means are justified when confronting systemic abuse by the state. Their story redefines conventional notions of heroism and civic duty. It speaks to a profound belief that in a democracy, the ultimate authority rests with the people, and that when institutions betray that trust, citizens have not only a right, but perhaps a responsibility to act. The media burglars demonstrated that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Their calculated gamble, born of desperation and a deep love for their country's ideals, set in motion a chain of events that exposed the FBI's darkest secrets and initiated a long overdue process of reform and reckoning. The individuals who formed the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI were not seeking personal aggrandizement. Their motivations were rooted in a profound sense of justice and a deep concern for the erosion of democratic principles. They witnessed the escalating government repression of dissent, the targeting of civil rights activists and anti-war protesters, and concluded that extraordinary measures were necessary. They were not driven by ideology alone, but by a compelling moral imperative to expose what they rightly suspected was a secret war being waged against American citizens by their own government. Their actions were a testament to principled resistance. The long years of silence that followed the burglary were a crucial part of their success and their sacrifice. They understood that anonymity was their shield, not only for themselves but for the integrity of the information they had unleashed. Had they been caught, the focus might have shifted to their prosecution, potentially overshadowing the damning content of the files. This self-imposed discipline, this ability to resist the urge to claim credit or to confide in others beyond their small circle, speaks volumes about their dedication. The weight of such a monumental secret, shared among so few for so long, must have forged an unbreakable bond of trust and mutual protection. The fact that these amateur burglars were never apprehended by the formidable investigative machinery of the FBI remains a remarkable aspect of this story. It underscores the meticulousness of their planning, the discipline of their execution, and the unwavering solidarity within their ranks. It also perhaps highlights an initial underestimation by the Bureau, an inability to conceive that such a daring raid could be orchestrated by ordinary citizens rather than seasoned criminals or foreign agents. Their enduring invisibility was a constant, quiet rebuke to the FBI's image of omniscience and control, a source of deep institutional frustration for decades. Ultimately, the legacy of the media burglars is not merely etched in the historical record of reforms that followed. It resides in the powerful example they set. They demonstrated that a small group of determined individuals, operating with courage and a clear moral compass, can indeed challenge entrenched power and effect significant change. They were architects of accountability, not through official channels which they believed were failing, but through direct, audacious action. Their story serves as an enduring inspiration for those who believe in the power of citizen engagement to safeguard liberty and expose injustice. The revelations ignited by the media documents were a critical catalyst for tangible institutional change. The public outcry, fueled by the undeniable evidence of COINTELPRO's abuses, compelled a reluctant Congress to act. The Church Committee's investigations in the mid-1970s were a direct consequence, peeling back layers of secrecy that had long shrouded the FBI and other intelligence agencies. These hearings laid bare the extent of domestic spying and political interference, confirming the worst suspicions of civil libertarians and shocking a nation that had largely trusted its intelligence apparatus. The impact on public perception was profound and lasting. This period of intense scrutiny led directly to landmark legislative reforms designed to prevent such abuses from recurring. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, of 1978, for all its subsequent controversies and evolving interpretations, was a foundational attempt to bring intelligence gathering, particularly involving American citizens, under a framework of legal and judicial oversight. Attorney General guidelines were revised to impose stricter controls on FBI investigations, particularly those targeting domestic political activity. These measures sought to draw clearer lines between legitimate national security concerns and the impermissible suppression of dissent, a distinction dangerously blurred under Hoover's long tenure. However, the passage of laws and the issuance of new guidelines did not entirely resolve the underlying tensions between state security and individual liberty. The decades since the media burglary have seen new threats emerge, new technologies developed, and new justifications advanced for expansive surveillance powers. The fundamental questions about how much secrecy is permissible, how much oversight is necessary, and where the limits of government authority lie, remain subjects of intense debate. The legacy of COINTELPRO serves as a crucial cautionary chapter in this ongoing dialogue, a reminder of the potential for even democratic governments to overstep their bounds. The importance of remembering the media heist, therefore, transcends mere historical interest. It is a vital lesson for contemporary society. As new generations confront evolving challenges to their privacy and freedoms, the story of the Citizens Commission offers both a warning and an inspiration. It underscores the necessity of constant vigilance, the critical role of a free press, and the enduring power of citizens who dare to demand accountability from those in power. The legal and procedural changes prompted by their actions represent a significant, though imperfect, bulwark against the recurrence of such systemic abuses. The break-in at the media FBI office was far more than a daring escapade. It was a pivotal moment that irrevocably altered the landscape of American governance and civil liberties. By exposing J. Edgar Hoover's secret COINTELPRO operations, the Citizens Commission did not merely embarrass a powerful institution. They forced a national reckoning with the uncomfortable realities of unchecked state power. The stolen files provided the irrefutable evidence that stripped away the FBI's carefully cultivated veneer of infallibility, revealing a disturbing pattern of surveillance, manipulation, and the systematic suppression of dissent. This was a wound from which the Bureau's absolute authority would never fully recover. The immediate consequences were clear: the termination of COINTELPRO, the landmark Church Committee investigations, and the subsequent legislative reforms aimed at curbing intelligence agency abuses. These were tangible victories born from an act of profound civil disobedience. Yet the deeper, more enduring impact lies in the shift in public consciousness. The media documents armed the American people with knowledge, fostering a healthy skepticism towards official narratives, and a greater understanding of the need for robust oversight of those entrusted with the powers of the state. It was a powerful lesson in the fragility of democratic safeguards. The story of the media burglars continues to resonate profoundly today because its central themes are timeless. The struggle between security and liberty, the citizen's role in holding power accountable, the courage required to speak truth to power. These are perennial challenges in any democratic society. The actions of those 8 individuals serve as a potent reminder that history can be shaped not only by presidents and generals, but also by ordinary people who refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of nonviolent resistance and the profound impact of truth revealed. In the final analysis, the media heist stands as a courageous assertion of democratic ideals. It underscored the fundamental principle that government agencies are accountable to the people they serve, not the other way around. The Citizens Commission, through their risky and selfless act, did not seek to destroy the FBI, but to recall it to its proper constitutional role. Their actions, though technically illegal, served a higher purpose: the defense of liberty itself. History's whisper from Media, Pennsylvania, reminds us that vigilance is the eternal price of freedom, and that sometimes the most profound patriotism lies in the courage to dissent.